When Paul Pelosi, the husband to the Speaker of the House, isn't busy facing potential jail time for drunk driving, he's avidly buying and selling stocks. If you think that sounds a little unfair, his wife's minions are sure to assuage your concerns by pointing you to two little tiny letters on the couple's required disclosures, SP. It stands for spouse. See? All those allegations of insider trading are nothing more than a giant misunderstanding, Pelosi's press team assures us with perfect teeth and crooked smiles. The Speaker does not own any stocks, you silly goose. Her husband does. She has no knowledge or say over how they're bought and sold. That's all up to Paul when he isn't hitting the sauce with Hunter. Every time these allegations of insider trading hit the headlines, it's merely a weird coincidence that Nancy just so happens to be involved with legislation affecting the very same stocks that Paul is either buying up or trading. See how crazy all this is? I'm pretty sure there's a name for this. It's called gaslighting someone. Just a few months ago, reports exposed the fact that the Pelosi's may have made as much as $30 million from scooping up millions in bullish call options, as the New York Post described it, on stocks including Google, Salesforce, Micron Technology, and others, while Nancy Pelosi was in Congress slow-walking bills brought by her own party on reining in big tech. That wasn't the first time the Pelosi's were caught up in such a scandal, and it certainly won't be the last time. But you know what they say.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, fool me once, shame on you. It fooled me, we can't get fooled again.
But like on so many other things, Bush was wrong. You can get fooled again, because now new financial disclosures show that Paul Pelosi bought up to $5 million in stock options for a top computer chip company called NVIDIA, which deals in semiconductors, and he did that back in June on the 17th. Those 20,000 shares he bought are worth between $1 and $5 million. And guess what's happening as early as tomorrow, this Tuesday? The Senate is convening for a vote on a bill that could send billions of dollars in subsidies and tax credits to boost domestic semiconductor manufacturing. How convenient. A similar bill passed the House back in February. But guess what? If I had to guess, nothing's going to happen to them. And in a few more months, there'll be another similar scandal. And on this cycle will repeat. In fact, a couple of senators, including Richard Burr and Dianne Feinstein, got caught selling stocks after a sensitive briefing in January of 2020 about COVID measures that were coming down the pike that was not made public at the time. And yet those senators sold off stocks in industries that would be hurt by lockdowns and bought stocks in industries that would benefit from so much of our lives becoming virtual. If you feel robbed yet, and frankly, you always should, from the mere existence of the Federal Reserve, but let's just take a quick peek over the Atlantic to see what your tax dollars were buying over in Ukraine. Yes, Zelensky is now purging his government, with over 651 criminal proceedings being opened up into potential acts of treason. This even includes two senior members of the administration, with the head of Ukraine's security services being fired from his job. Maybe these guys are actively colluding with Russia during a time of war. Or maybe they want to end the war as quickly and reasonably as possible, and that is heresy these days. And since this comes after a total ban on opposition media and opposition parties, then the second option seems at least viable, don't you think? It's like the Middle East all over again. Stoke the flames of global conflict with coups and color revolutions. Arm and train small, unaccountable yet nasty groups. Let innocent people on the ground die for a war that should have never happened. And refuse to negotiate terms that make sense from a regional point of view, but which don't further the goals of those in Brussels and DC. Oh, and also, like the Middle East, specifically with regard to Afghanistan last year, with all the billions we left behind in military equipment, which quickly became the property of the Taliban and the terror groups they sold the surplus to, well, NATO and the EU are now warning that the weapons that the U.S. is emptying its own stockpiles to ship overseas to Ukraine are now at risk of being smuggled into the black market into who knows whose hands. And now the crazy MSNBC regular Malcolm Nance is back from Ukraine after doing who knows what, probably a lot of hiding and grandstanding, and he has this message.
So we are well on to our way to a multi-year campaign. That we're already 2 years into this campaign where may have to fight the they in my title, and the they in my title who want to kill Americans are your neighbors.
That is a very scary thought, but it is a very important conversation to have given the fact that we are post-insurrection, as we've been saying all show long. My good friend, Malcolm Nance, it was great to see you safe and home. Thank you so much for being here. He is the author of the brand new book, They Want to Kill Americans, The Malicious, Terrorist, and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency. Definitely pick that up.
Did you catch that last part? The title of the book about the they Malcolm referenced, Trump supporters. Joining me now to discuss all this and more is Gavin, the president of the New York Young Republican Club, among many other titles. He's also the digital director at Getter and ambassador for TPUSA and Live Action. Gavin, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's always great to be on.
Great. So what do you make of this purge, or at least suspected purge, happening over in Ukraine right now?
Well, it just goes to show that all the propaganda and lies about Ukraine being this, shining, city on a hill, this beacon for democracy and freedom is a total farce. It was always a farce. Ukraine is a oligarchic-run state. Neo-Nazi battalions are completely infiltrating most of their armed forces. The country is essentially run by mafia-style oligarchs who sell out their country to the highest bidder. It's a corrupt country, probably the most corrupt country in Europe. And it's a failed state. And now you see that the hero of the Western propaganda, Zelensky, is showing his true colors. I would argue he's been showing his true colors for a while, with shutting down the opposition party, shutting down opposition press, jailing his political opponents. And now he's turning on his own. He's turning internally in his own ranks, purging people from his own government because he's paranoid and he feels the walls are coming in. So this is basically the last breaths of a failing puppet regime that's being propped up by the globalist American empire. So we'll see what happens in the coming weeks and months, but I don't think it'll be good for the Ukrainians, who are being used as pawns and puppets in this global war against Russia, in this East versus West conflict, NATO versus Russia. And it's not right, and it's not fair, and it's not just to see how the Ukrainians have to suffer from their own government and from governments in Brussels and Washington.
That's perfectly well said. I mean, I know a lot of people try to give Zelensky all these kudos, but I mean, he's the man who's leading his people like lambs to slaughter. Over this last decade, there were so many off-ramps, so many negotiations, the Minsk agreements that Ukraine didn't uphold, so many agreements that could have been done between Russia and Ukraine for them to, battle it out, but, properly in a diplomatic sense about what each side needs to feel comfortable. But of course, Ukraine, as you said, has been a pawn by the Western powers that have been trying to use it to break Russia for 30 years at this point. And it's getting a lot of innocent people killed, and it's so horrific to watch. Every single day you see those headlines coming out, people dying on the ground. And you look at some of the numbers, our friend Pedro Gonzalez, he brought this up, the National Endowment for Democracy between the years 1991 and 2013 he has here. The U.S. was footing the bill for them. And they put another $5 billion into Ukraine I have here, to promote civil society. But the thing is, the National Endowment for Ukraine, what they're known for is what their own co-founder, Alan Weinstein, once said, that they now overtly do what the CIA used to do covertly. And of course, we all know what that means. Regime changes and instability. Do you think that that is a key issue here when it comes to how the West, or at least Americans watching right now, should be viewing the lens through which we should be viewing this horrific war right now in Ukraine?
Absolutely. This was a preventable war, as you stated. There were many steps that could have been taken, many rational, reasonable diplomatic measures that could have been taken in the lead up to this war that could have prevented this death and destruction. But they were either too foolish or too arrogant, or purposely wanted to instigate this conflict. I mean, many are now discussing openly in the West that they view the Ukrainians as cannon fodder, because they're going to fight the Russians without the West having to lose any blood. We'll pay for this essentially this mercenary army to fight off the Russian Mongol hordes without having to shed any blood of our own. I mean, the whole thing is just very, very disgusting. It's very bleak, and it's pathetic. And you talked about these CIA operations. I mean, this is all this all really came from color revolutions that started going back in 2014. I mean, the CIA and Western intelligence have been instigating color revolutions across Eastern Europe and the world at large for many years. You could argue they instigated one in the United States in 2020, and this is essentially regime change. So you're removing, the duly elected representatives of one government and replacing them with your puppets, and then you use that new puppet regime to push your ends. And in this case, it was to use Ukraine as a place to funnel dirty money through, like we've seen with the Bidens, and also as a thorn on Russia's side. But in the end, I think the Russians are going to get the last laugh. They're slowly winning the war. They're waging a very tactical, slow conquest of the east and the south of Ukraine. They're slowly encircling many Ukrainian positions, and at the end of the day, it's going to look like most of southern and eastern Ukraine will be integrated into Russia, and that's only going to strengthen Russia's geostrategic position. It's only going to give them more strategic depth. It's only going to give them greater access to resources, to population, to coastline, to access to gas pipelines, etc. It's only making Russia's position stronger, and it's unifying a clear bloc of nations, Russia, India, China, etc., against the declining West. So even from a geopolitical standpoint, this was a complete failure. There's nothing to gain here and only everything to lose.
And last minute here, I have to ask you the other way in which the American taxpayer is being robbed, and that's all the people in D.C. living off our taxpayer dime, but also using those positions to game the system. The Pelosi's, yet another insider trading scandal. Your thoughts?
It just shows it's the end days of the republic, a bifurcated justice system. Regular Joe Schmo, if he wanted to trade on some knowledge he may have heard over at a bar, some insider information he heard over cocktails, he would be prosecuted and thrown in jail, and the full weight of the law would come upon him. But if you're a member of Congress, particularly someone like Nancy Pelosi, the upper echelons of American political society, or her husband, you could get away with anything. You could get away with, vehicular manslaughter. You could get away with insider trading. You could get away with anything. As long as you have the right last name and the right connections. It's absolutely disgusting. And I think that members of Congress should be completely banned from trading in equities. I mean, they have access to too much information. And if you're going to have insider trading laws to begin with, then don't let those, the most on the inside, benefit and then prevent the rest of society from taking advantage of those same privileges. It's either everyone gets to inside trade or no one gets to inside trade. The system we have now is completely contemptible, and a shame on Pelosi, her family, and all the money that they have been making on the backs of the American taxpayers, who are giving them their special privileges above everyone else.
Well, Gavin, we have to leave it there for tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.